Lord of Murder is most likely the most difficult achievement for Baldur's Gate 1, made even more difficult by the fact that there aren't a lot of ways to employ quick or fast strategies to grab it, like some of the other ones. It's just a long drawn out slog through the whole game from beginning to end, playing on the type of difficulty mode I would describe as a battle with numbers rather than something that feels like a meaningful and fair challenge. This video isn't a start to finish walkthrough, but a general concepts guide, though I will be discussing points that were notably difficult to get through. To get this achievement, you have to beat the game on Legacy of Bhaal difficulty mode. The way Legacy of Bhaal mode works is besides enemies getting all the bonuses from each difficulty level before it, such as more numerous or stronger enemy types, more damage, in Legacy of Bhaal mode they also get better chances to hit, better saving throws, and 3 times plus 80 the hit points. So a 4 hit point goblin in normal mode becomes a beefy thick monster in Legacy of Bhaal mode with 92 hit points that can literally one-shot your squishier party members. But all this does is turn the game into more of a grind than anything else. Most fights are won or lost based on getting control of the situation at the outset, usually with spells, and then once you've gotten that control, the fight becomes 6 dudes slapping the monster with wet noodles for several awkward minutes until it collapses from exhaustion. The Baldur's Gate games were originally on PC, and there were several ways there to mitigate the difficulty of Legacy of Bhaal mode. In planning this achievement out, I thought, okay, I'll just import a high-level character from the very end of Baldur's Gate 2, like you could on PC, and steamroll the game, right? No. The import system isn't as freeform as it is on PC, and the console version only allows character imports from within each game. It doesn't even allow you to export from the DLC in Baldur's Gate 1, which is technically the same game. Another option you had in PC is starting a multiplayer game, which let you and up to 5 friends each make a single character and play the game together. Except you don't have to add anybody on the game, so all 6 characters you can create yourself or even import 6 copies of a character you've already beaten the game with. You can't do that here either. As of right now, there isn't a multiplayer option, at least on the Xbox version. So your best option is one high-level character you've already finished the game with, and bring all of your magical equipment with that character as well. You can start a new game at character level 1 with nothing, but it changes the game from a simple grind to trying to drill through the earth by rubbing your face into it. When using an imported character, the game does scale NPCs level up slightly, so you won't be surrounded by low-level party members, but it's not 100%, so your party members will be trailing you slightly in that regard. You will also be short on nice magical equipment for the team as compared to a regular playthrough, as you won't be doing as much side questing and exploration. However, that's mitigated by the fact that you will be leaning really heavily on a few select strategies and spells to get you through fights, so that you won't really need much more equipment than what you can find through the primary locations and throughout the main plot. I did almost no side questing in my Legacy of Bhaal playthrough and didn't have an issue with not having the right tools for the job. The biggest influence to how you play out combat in Legacy of Bhaal is the change to hit points that all enemies get. This makes damage spells that were previously high impact nukes in normal mode almost not worth casting in this one. As well, some spells are based on enemies having a low amount of hit points, and they legitimately just don't do anything in Legacy of Bhaal mode because even the lowliest rats have insane amounts of health. This also puts more emphasis on physical damage to finish out fights, but it doesn't make mages useless. They just become more focused on summoning monsters and crowd controlling enemies. Fights in this mode usually play out depending on how well you can manage an enemy's attention and keep him occupied with either hitting the wrong targets, such as expendable monsters you can continually summon, or not doing anything at all, such as stunning them or otherwise crowd controlling them in some way. Most times if any enemy gets onto a party member, they'll die in a split second. If it's a tanky party member with tons of hit points and armor, you'll get a few more seconds. Because of the low level cap in Baldur's Gate 1, you won't be dealing with a huge number of spells like in Icewind Dale or Baldur's Gate 2, only a few very simple ones that you'll need. Healing and buff spells aren't as useful because this is still a relatively low level adventure. Heals are usually too weak at this point to make a difference in combat, and fights hinge on not even being in swinging distance of monsters, so buffs don't really come into play. In my playthrough, 2 spells were all that I needed: the level 2 mage spell Web and any summoning spell. Web coats the area in, surprise surprise, a bunch of webs over an area, and creatures who fail the saving throw are unable to move or take any action. The web itself grants a penalty to saving against it, and they must make a roll each round they are inside the area of effect. Being unable to move also means that they can't dodge attacks, so this spell is a crowd control spell and a buff to your damage all in one. Now, some enemies have resistances or can just save against this effect, which is where summoning comes into play. If using web itself doesn't work, summon a wall of monsters between you and the enemy. You're trying to stall the fight out as long as possible so you can wade through those giant pools of hit points. Web and summon spells will get you through 95% of the game alone. No exaggeration there, but here are a few other spells that get honorable mentions. Magic Missile is good, consistent damage. It's a bit on the low side, but not a lot of enemies can resist it. And it's got utility for interrupting mages' spellcasting due to casting speed. Haste is good for increasing your attack and movement speed, which speeds up how fast you can burn through the enemy health, and it helps you kite away from them. Horror is poor man's crowd control, but it's not as dependable, as some enemies can still randomly lash out as they're running around in terror. Charms, if they succeed, can take an enemy out of the fight and give you another meat shield. Charm them and then let them soak up their friends' hits first. Dispel and counter magic in general are also moderately useful, though in my experience it's generally easier to just soak up enemy mage spells with summoned monsters and then fight the mage in a melee fight. Finally, when you get to Baldur's Gate, go buy several Wands of Monster Summoning and Wands of Paralyzation at Sorcerer's Sundries in East Baldur's Gate. These are invaluable in the later half of the game. This isn't a comprehensive list, it's just what I got the most mileage out of in my playthrough. So let's get this out of the way. You're going to be loading a lot. This is a game based on dice rolls, and as such, sometimes you're just going to get the short end of the stick. If a shapeshifter decides to focus the wrong person, you reload. If a stray monster you've incited panic in decides to run in fear all the way into your backline and then man up, you reload. If that lightning bolt decides to bounce in just the right way to hit your entire team 5 or 6 times in a row, you reload. It's just the nature of the game. Start saving very frequently, and a hot tip, you can even save in the middle of some fights. If you break line of sight or go into a different room where none of your teammates can spot an enemy, it'll let you save. Just be careful not to lock yourself into a bad fight that you can't get out of. In the final fight, I even left the room, saved, and rested to full health, and then went back into the fight with less enemies to fight overall. Don't be afraid to fight dirty like this. Pride isn't really a thing in this game mode. The majority of fights, you cast a web, preferably off screen, then creep forward and shoot them down from afar, keeping a wall of monsters between you and them if they get through the webs. Melee opponents you typically don't want to engage with at all, as it's not really possible to get enough armor class in this game to stop their hits from landing. Some of the later fighters can also hit multiple times around too. Remember, on this difficulty, if anyone besides your tankiest members get focused, they usually die instantly. And occasionally you'll need to have a dedicated spellcaster continually summoning monsters to keep them occupied. Enemies with ranged weapons, you want to have the monsters summoned beforehand so they can never pick a teammate as a target, and keep pushing them with the monsters. If you can get them into a melee fight, they usually aren't as effective, and most late game archers have magic arrows or bullets that hurt, so if you can get them to pull out their weaker melee weapons, it removes that option for them. Finally, spellcasters can be serious threats initially, but typically become minimal annoyances after they burn through all their spells. By themselves, you can typically focus everything on them and use quick firing spells like Magic Missile to interrupt theirs. If they aren't by themselves or you can't otherwise focus them, try to flood their attention with summons and keep your party's distance while they burn all their spells on your expendable troops. And after they stop casting spells and start trying to knife you, they become way less threatening. For almost the entire game, web and summons will get you through any fight. You'll occasionally run into a mage or a group of enemies that will make you reload a couple times, but only when they get lucky with their dice rolls or you get unlucky with yours. The last 2 chapters is where the game gets significantly more difficult. The first area where you start to encounter more resistance is when you start running into the greater doppelgangers in chapter 6. These things buff themselves with haste and blur spells, so they hit hard, they hit fast, they're difficult to attack, and it's difficult to respond to them changing targets because of how fast they move. That's not to say summons and web spells don't work on them, but you'll be burning through more charges of your Wands of Monster Summoning. This comes to a head when you have to defend Duke Belt and Duke Janath against a horde of them in chapter 7, and it doesn't help that they are just dumb too. You have no control over the Dukes, and if they go down you get a non-standard game over, and that's assuming that Sarevok just doesn't kill you here. This fight requires extreme micromanagement to keep threats against the Dukes down, and you can't use web in this fight, as the doppelgangers save a lot more against the web spell than Belt and Janath do, which makes them sitting ducks if they ever fail a save to the web. Summons here are very important to draw aggro, but there is 100% going to be enemies that break through your line and start chunking Belt or Janath, and this is where Wand of Paralyzation comes in. Identify which doppelgangers are swinging at your friends and stun them, and then focus fire that one down. The faster you eliminate each doppelganger, the easier and easier this fight gets. They will make saves against the wands, but not enough that it's not a worthwhile strategy. I did have to reload several times before I got lucky with target selection of the doppelgangers and lucky stuns from the wand. After this fight, Duke Belt will teleport you to the Thieves' Maze, which has another difficult enemy in store, Skeleton Warriors. If these were the final boss of the game, I wouldn't be able to finish it. These enemies are immune to pretty much any spell effect you can do. They one-shot anything, and you're jammed inside a tiny hallway, so you can't really kite them or use space to any advantage. I really couldn't beat them. I reloaded a bunch here and eventually took the Coward's Way out and just used monsters to distract them against one side of the hallway and ran past them. Finally, you'll run into the big bad Sarevok himself inside a dilapidated Temple of Bhaal, along with a few friends. This is a very, very difficult fight. Sarevok himself is fast and absolutely nukes anyone that stands next to him. He has a few friends, Tazok, who can also destroy anything in melee, Angelo, a fighter mage who is probably the least dangerous here, but no less a threat, and Samaj, a high-level mage and probably the reason this fight is so hard. I spent about 2 hours and reload upon reload trying to get this one right. Starting the fight by approaching Sarevok is not in your best interest, as it aggroes all of his friends, and Samaj teleports into the middle of the room, which is a good spot to start dropping lightning bolts on your team, and he also likes to cast fear and hold spells on them as well. Your best bet is to split them up in some way, summon some monsters right on top of them, and force attack Samaj right off the bat without running into Sarevok, and then back off and continue summoning monsters and sending them towards the top of the room until you burn through Angelo and Samaj's spells. You want to keep them as far away from you as possible while they have all their spells up, and then start drawing them towards you after they're spent. Web still works here on all fours, so keep that up and try to pull one at a time down. Regardless of how far away he is, Samaj also likes to cast Lightning Bolt at anything that moves, which can still bounce around the room and kill you anyways. You'll most likely reload a couple times just for this fact alone, but after you've gotten past all the spells in the room, the difficulty of this fight drops considerably. Just keep summoning overwhelming numbers of monsters and drop the 3 friends before drawing Sarevok into the fight. By himself, Saravok doesn't have much more to him than hitting hard. Keep web spells up and monsters on him, and he eventually succumbs to the damage. I even landed a lucky charge from a Wand of Paralyzation, which takes the fight right out of him. Getting through this fight depends on a lot of luck, but if you've made it this far, just keep reloading and eventually you'll defeat Saravok and pick up this incredibly difficult achievement.